the increase in women who feel that they deserve pleasure too, and the rise in masturbation. And I definitely think that's significant, but also you didn't really mention anything also about the rise of hookup culture. And I did some research on this for a paper, but just dances in general, how this culture has a day, how we dance and interact, and sort of this blurring of consent. And like you mentioned, for women, sex is connected with safe, and what that means. And part of safe, I feel like, is their consent, as you said.
I did not pay her to ask this question, but I spent a significant amount of time in Guyland addressing it. Not only because I talked to a lot of people about sexuality, but I also was part of a large-scale quantitative study of about 20,000 undergraduates at all kinds of different campuses all across the country, where we asked about sexual behavior, and basically it was a study about hooking up. And one of the things that's interesting about hooking up is it seems so gender neutral or gender equal, an equal number of participants and everything. And what we basically found was that there are lots of ways in which it is quite unequal and quite reproduces the same kind of gender inequality that we've been struggling with in other arenas. And so we found, so there's a lot of evidence of that. And the best evidence of that, of course, is that the hooking up itself for women tends to be more purposive than it is for men, which is to say it's supposed to lead to something. And so at some places, at most places, in fact, almost 100% of the cases of this in our study, now that's 20,000, so when you find 100%, you like hit the gold standard. Almost 100% of this particular event was initiated by women, and that's the talk, right? That's what it's called most places. At Stanford, they call it the DTR, define the relationship, right? It's the one where you say, okay, we've hooked up a few times, so are we or aren't we? Like a couple, are we like not? Are we now dating? And guys figure out all kinds of evasive strategies to not have that talk, because of course it ruins everything. Because now you're not like just hooking up, which doesn't mean anything, but it now has to mean something, which means it doesn't mean nothing, which is no longer a hookup. So that's so in a sense that really does illustrate some of the gender inequality. But let me go one step further on the sexual behavior part. Have your parents come to you with this moms generally, with this kind of anxiety? They've read something in the newspaper, and they come to you and they say, oh, what do you know about this epidemic of oral sex among teenagers? Or, have you ever heard of a rainbow party? Right? Now, you've bumped into this stuff, right? Now, I have yet to meet anyone who has actually been at a rainbow party. This is a great urban myth. This, because, you know what it is? Everybody knows what a rainbow party is? Okay. No? A rainbow party is a party that teenagers have where all of the girls wear different color lipsticks. And then they perform oral sex on the guys, and at the end of the night, the guys compare their penises to see the different color lipstick rings on their penises. And I'm thinking to myself, people who are thinking this have never had oral sex because, lipstick smudges. What do they expect, like Saturn? It's insane, right? It's truly, plus the idea, we're going to sit there at the end of the party and go, let me see yours. Come on, not happening. But here's the other part of this. The epidemic of oral sex, right? Sounds like everybody's doing it. It's epidemic of oral sex. Let me tell you, there is no appreciable difference among teenagers younger than 18. Okay, so college, there's a significant increase. There is no appreciable increase among teenagers under the age of 18 in cunnilingus. There is an enormous increase in fellatio. We are not talking about an epidemic of oral sex. We're talking about an epidemic of girls servicing boys. Of girls being told, sure, you can hang with us. Here's what you have to do. Right? That's different. Now we're not talking about sexual entitlement, now we're talking about gender inequality, right? And so that has to be part of the conversation. Because what does that do? It silences your own agency. It silences your voice. How can you possibly figure out, what do I like, when this is what you're told you have to do? You had a question, yeah?
Yeah, going back to the beginning of the talk, you started with the concept of essentialism, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and just the idea that we sort of have to get through that to have most of these conversations effectively. I was just wondering your tips on breaking down essentialism in like 5-minute conversation, 2 sentence notes on it.
Oh dear. So basically the 5-minute, the Cliff Notes of the Cliff Notes version of We're All Earthlings.
Right.
I actually took this on when I did the book Gendered Society a few years ago. That's actually the first chapter of that book. It's basically to take on all the biological research that says basically we're all so fundamentally biologically different, whether it's evolutionary psychology or hormones or brain chemistry and brain structure. And I basically took on all of that literature in there to debunk it. And basically I would just say that I think that sophisticated scientists would never make the kind of claims that someone like John Stossel would make. The kind of, those kind of very sort of grandiose men and women are so biologically fundamentally different, or that the essentialist sorts of things. That basically, we can use credible biologists to make these kinds of arguments, rather than having to make them from a social science or philosophical perspective. So my answer is, know it. Know those arguments as well as the people who, because I think people use those kinds of arguments kind of cavalierly. They don't really believe them. It's just a kind of shorthand currency to avoid any kind of taking on these sorts of things. We're biologically programmed to be aggressive and violent and rapacious animals, which I think is sort of male bashing. I think that the real male bashers, not feminists, they actually believe that men are capable of stepping up and being real human beings. The real male bashers are the anti-feminist right wing, who basically believe we are biologically predisposed to be rapacious animals. Can't do anything about it, boys will be boys, oh well. Right, that's male bashing to me. Yeah?
Earlier you mentioned, you talked about like nurturing children, that so there was something feminine or masculine about these sort of performances. And queer theory at least maintains a difference between sex and gender. And so if we don't have these gender performances, what does it mean for gender in general? If we don't call this thing masculine, this thing feminine?
Well, that's a sort of the variation on your first question. I still think that the answer to that is maybe this is what you might call one of my academic heroes when I was in graduate school was a writer named Andre Gortz, who said that basically what we need to do on the left is find non-reformist reforms. Reforms that if they were truly instituted, the whole system basically would collapse. Small reforms, little things that you would be tinkering with, not a big grandiose thing, but that everything would kind of revolve around this. For example, here's a really good example. Nancy Chodoro's book, Reproduction of Mothering, is a kind of non-reformist reform, right? It's the kind of thing that says if men and women shared parenting, and if we raised boys to be parents, then the whole binary would begin to erode. It would sort of crumble. You couldn't sustain the gender inequality because part of what we raise boys to do, the way we define masculinity is not to be like girls, not to be women, right? So if you don't do that, the system itself begins to crumble. So that's what I look for. This is a non-reformist reform. If American society, now I have to say, there's one other piece of this though. We are asked to do it alone. We have no social support in the institutional sort of family policy in the United States. I hope that as students you have some sense of what this looks like in other cultures.